Hey everyone, it's Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful, Rabbit Hole, Lauren Frey, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. So there has been a lot of things to talk about over the past couple of days. I haven't really been able to talk about any of them because, I've been so busy and it's just been so hectic and, just so much going on. So the Nintendo Direct last week, was it last week now? Was phenomenal. It was one of the best directs I think we've seen in a long time. I think it pretty much single-handedly buried the narrative that the Switch was going to die by the end of 2023 and that it would be replaced by the Switch 2. And I think that's kind of what I wanted to focus on today is talk a little bit about like the change in narrative, because I don't think a lot of people are like really picking up on this. I don't think most people are really like paying attention to what game journalists are trying to put out there and trying to like paint as like, the reality of the situation, right? Right now, game journalists are trying to convince you, the consumer, that Nintendo Switch is on the way out and Nintendo is preparing to release its new console. Now, that's true to a certain extent. They're always planning their next piece of hardware, but the idea that like the Switch is slowing down, it's becoming obsolete, it's becoming irrelevant, it's not selling as well as it used to, that like there will not be any new games after Tears of the Kingdom, are all demonstrably false. And that's been true since I think even before the Direct. But the Direct really kind of buried the narrative, and I really have to wonder if the timing of the Direct coincides a lot with the timing of the investment reports, right? They released their analyst reports where they released a bunch of big numbers. Game journalists tried downplaying that, and they tried like painting a narrative as like, oh, but they didn't talk about the new console. Is the Switch dead? And then they released the Nintendo Direct, and suddenly we have a lot of new games coming out this year. It's weird to see the lengths that the gaming journalism industry will go to try and downplay the Nintendo console. And we are, I think, in the middle of like a transitionary period where it feels like we're going from like the Switch Pro is inevitable and will be unveiled very soon to like the new Switch. The Switch 2 is inevitable and will be released soon. So we're not getting like a mid-gen upgrade anymore. We're getting a full-blown new console that will make the Switch completely obsolete. Please don't keep buying Switch games. Stop, please. So essentially what we're seeing is just this situation where game journalists are doing everything in their power to try and present a narrative that simply isn't true. And we've seen this like a lot back in the day. I recall very strongly how in the Wii U era, we kind of had like leading up to the Wii U era, we had a lot of narratives about like, oh, the Wii HD, the Wii can't keep up this momentum forever. And then Nintendo finally unveiled the Wii U, and then journalists whose job is to know about what's going on and to like report on it to the public, they presented this narrative that like, ooh, Nintendo was so muddled and confused. Nobody here even knew that it was a real console, a new console, which was of course ridiculous because people had been talking. Nintendo had confirmed they were going to unveil new hardware earlier that year, right? So, like, you notice this kind of thing, right? Where Nintendo says they're going to unveil new hardware, game journalists, like, pretend to act confused, but when Nintendo is, like, very specific, is that, like, no, we're going to continue supporting Switch with new games and new features. We're going to sell new consoles. We're going to make the Switch sell more than the PS2. You see game journalists like doing all sorts of crazy damage control. It is absurd the lengths they've gone to like downplay all like the really big relevant news in regard to Nintendo Switch's analyst reports. In fact, I don't think most people even know that the Switch has actually outsold the PS4. It's something that's like mysteriously not talked about in gaming circles. The Switch is supposed to be dead, and yet it's supposedly outsold like the extremely popular PlayStation 4. And it's also outsold the Game Boy. But, Switch is like the third best-selling platform of all time at this rate. And it's only a matter of time until it catches up to the DS and the PS2. And it's going to outsell both, I'd say. By the way, I predicted that before the Switch even came out, that it would outsell the PS2. So again, my prediction seems to have come true. So the thing is, though, like the Switch is going to explode in sales and popularity in the next year. Like, not only is this going to be like one of the best years for Nintendo ever, following up after like their already great year 2022, like we're going to see a lot of new people come in because of the release of the Mario movie. A lot of people aren't really appreciating that right now. In fact, I really got to take a video about that as well. But people aren't really thinking about that in that context. But when the Mario movie comes out, you're going to see a lot of people go out and buy Switches and buy new Mario games, right? You know, how many Mario games are on Switch, right? You know, 3D World, New Super Mario Bros. U, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Like, I legit think we're going to see, like, a lot of these games jump considerably this quarter. Right, I think you know, the New Super Mario Bros. U has sold like 15 million copies on Switch, which is insanely well, by the way, considering the game was so heavily downplayed when it was first showed off a decade ago. But you know, I legit could see it like cracking 25 million like next quarter. Well, maybe 20 million. Like I could see it like jumping considerably in the next couple of months, purely because of the hype for the Mario movie. You know, like people are going to like, you know, people who weren't Mario fans until recently are going to like, you know, really realize that the IP is like at a high point right now. And they're going to like want to get on that. They're going to go to see the Mario movie and want to like buy more Mario products. And of course they're going to go for the games that are readily available. They're going to go for Odyssey, they're going to go for like Mario Party, Mario Kart. Like we're going to see a lot of more enthusiasm for these games. And it's interesting how no analyst seems to have picked up on that. You know, it seems like a very obvious thing to me that the Mario movie is, whether it's like well received or not, it is going to be well received and it is going to be very successful. Whatever happens with the movie, you're going to see a lot of people going to see it, and as a result of that, you're going to see a lot of people begin to show some kind of interest in the Mario brand, which is of course going to lead them to the games, which is of course going to lead them to Nintendo consoles, which is of course is going to lead them to other games. And it's really something that I think game journalists are deliberately downplaying. In fact, you're not really seeing a lot of them try to say, acknowledge that Super Mario Bros. The movie is going to be the best video game adaptation this year. You know, best video game to film adaptation, you know, because that gets in the way of their narrative that like The Last of Us is like some compelling narrative that defies all logic. Like nothing could possibly, nothing this good could possibly exist on this or on this earth. Right? That is the logic that game journalists are going on. Like they're trying to like downplay Nintendo products in order to hype up like whatever shit that like Netflix or HBO shits out, you know? Like, and I think The Last of Us is a really good example of that, you know? I think I think Hi-Fi Rush is a very good example of that. Forspoken, I think, was defended by these people. And I do think we're quickly approaching the point where, like, it's going to be more and more difficult to downplay the success of the Switch because we're in a new generation of hardware. It's competing against the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. And despite what the analysts want you to think, those platforms are never, ever going to outstrip Switch. It just simply isn't going to happen. They're both flailing consoles that have like killed all their iconic IPs. All the third parties have like gone underwater, and Nintendo is back on the top, right where it belongs. Well, to be fair, Nintendo was always on top, but the issue has always been like the whole handheld versus console divide. You know, like game journalists conveniently try to like not let people know that Nintendo was dominating the console industry, the handheld industry, right? It was ridiculous the lengths that like they went to downplay Nintendo back in the Game Boy DS era. It's just unbelievable. Like looking back on it, just how many great games I never even heard of growing up. You know, stuff like Wario Land or Super Mario Land or even Link's Awakening. I think I didn't discover until I was a bit older. Well, no, I had the game when I was growing up, but I lost it and then I rediscovered it as an adult. I never heard game journalists like discuss that as like being one of the best games ever. One of the best Zelda games of all time. Top tier Zelda, right? It was like other fans, like we're at the point where like people are just picking up Switch, picking up Nintendo consoles, and just discovering games for themselves. They don't need to be told by game journalists like what to play or what to look forward to. They just discover it organically. And I think more and more that like the bleeding of game journalists is becoming irrelevant. Like how many people are really paying attention to these people who are telling you that like Switch sales are way down and that like Nintendo's going to be in trouble if they don't release a Switch 2 soon. Like I don't think it's all that many people. Like you'll see YouTubers now and again like say that like, oh, Metroid Prime Remastered was totally leaked ahead of time, or that like we knew that what was the other thing? Oh yeah, Switch Pro was in development, but it was canceled because of the chip shortage. Like they will push narratives like that onto the population, but like it's not really all that widely believed or even like reported on. It's just a narrative to keep like their little their little circle jerk going for just a little bit longer. But more and more it's becoming like clear that these people have no control over this situation. Like Review Tech USA is releasing videos right now telling you that like the Switch can't compete with the Steam Deck of all things, a platform that hasn't even outsold the N Gauge. Are you serious? Are you delusional? Like you're comparing like a platform that sold 1 million units against Switch, which has sold 122 and counting. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo sold more than Steam Deck, like significantly more than 4 times more than Steam Deck this quarter alone. It's not unreasonable for that to happen. Like I have no appreciation for no respect for people who keep pushing these narratives that Switch is like an underpowered piece of hardware that can't compete, because it simply isn't true. How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man, regarding like, console hardware and like what makes a platform successful? Like NES wasn't the most powerful in the market. The Super Nintendo, had to compete with like the Neo Geo and stuff like that. Like this idea that like, oh, more horsepower is better, it means better games. It's a load of crap. It always has been. You know what I mean? It's never been true. Ever. And yet this myth still persists because there's a very dedicated group of people out there who need Nintendo to fail in some way, shape, or form in order to keep themselves relevant. That's how I see it, is that like these people aren't gaming enthusiasts. They don't care about all the great upcoming games coming out for Switch this month. Stuff like Octopath Traveler 2, Kirby, Cereza and the Lost Demon. I think Advance Wars is coming out soon. Fatal Frame 4, first time Western release ever, Tears of the Kingdom is coming out in May. Pikmin 4, like new IPs like Deca Police, Rain Code, Professor Layton is coming back. Fantasy Life is finally getting a real console sequel. Like, there's all this stuff that's like really exciting to all these people, and yet you seriously have game journalists saying that like, no, that doesn't count. It's not big enough. It's not relevant enough. Like Tears of the Kingdom is just an expansion pack. Yeah, we don't know anything about the game. We don't know anything about how it plays. Like Nintendo hasn't shown a whole lot from it, but we just know it's an expansion pack. That's why we're not looking forward to it. That game doesn't look good at all, and it's such obvious coping. It's so obviously delusional. I don't understand how anybody can buy into this, into thinking that like this is actually a respectable stance to take, because it really isn't. And I've grown tired of hearing this over and over and over again. And I think a lot of other fans have too, of like this perpetual state of like Nintendo being doomed. Like back before 2017 Switch came out, like people were seriously talking about like, oh, whether or not the Switch would fail, and now, now that it's succeeded, you still have people saying it's going to fail, like it's such a delusional mindset to think that like Nintendo is always on the verge of failure. It simply isn't true. And it's becoming less and less true every year. Like back in the 90s, it felt like maybe potentially like one of these big giant conglomerates, like tech conglomerates like Sony, would like eclipse them in popularity eventually, but that simply hasn't happened. And like we still have this dedicated group of people who refuse to admit it. And now, in 2023, the Switch is slated to have a great year, fantastic year even, and you still have a handful of people who refuse to acknowledge it.